Hi everyone, this is Yana Smakula and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'm watercoloring a new background stamp from Simon Says Stamp called Cosmos Background using my Danielle Smith watercolor palette. I started working on this card by stamping the background in clear embossing ink onto Arch's hot press watercolor paper using my stamp platform. Just to be safe, I stamped it twice. You can stamp it without the platform, but for these large 6x6 background stamps, I have found it's especially useful to have the platform or some sort of a stamping tool, as it really ensures you get the best results. Next, I covered my paper with white embossing powder. This is embossing powder from Hero Arts, and I also managed to spill the entire bottle or the entire jar on my desk. I cleaned it all up later. I used one of my paintbrushes. I used a wide paintbrush, like a little broom on my desk, and I put all of the powder back into the jar. Anyhow, I heat set the background with my heat tool and I started coloring. I picked watercolor paper for this card as I wanted to do watercoloring. I also have another card coming up soon where I used my polychromos pencils to color this background. I haven't finished coloring it as there's quite a lot to color, but I'll share it on my blog once it is finished. Anyhow, I shared many videos on my channel using my Danielle Smith watercolors, but I don't think I've ever shared a video showing how I used this dot chart or the palette itself. And I was getting some questions recently about the amount of watercolor in each of those cards, so I wanted to demonstrate on video that you do get a fairly good amount of watercolor in there. Now, depending on how you like to color, meaning if you like your colors very pale, if you dilute the pigment with a lot of water, or if you like bold and saturated colors and you don't dilute the pigment but rather use a lot of it in your project, one dot will last you a different amount of time and will last you for a different number of projects. I don't have one number to give you. I can't say that this will last you for 10 cards, as we all color differently. And for some of you, it might last for 5 projects if you lay down a lot of pigment. And for others, it might last for 50 if you use just a little bit of color for your projects. Whenever I use this dot chart or a similar chart, I like to work with a water brush and not a paintbrush. Using a water brush just makes it easier to pick up the color, add the water to the color, and lay the color down onto your project. And I'll link to the exact water brush that I'm using today. This one is medium-sized water brush. I also have a detail water brush that I used to use a lot, but I don't use it so much anymore. Whenever I color with watercolor from a dot chart like this one, I also like to have a paper towel on my desk. This is just a place to clean my brush, and I'm trying to stop using my hand to clean it. It's not a good habit to have. And I try to have a clear block or any other sleek surface where I can dilute the color and maybe even mix different colors together. So how do you color with this dot chart? I make sure that my water brush is wet, that the bristles are wet. I pick up the color from the chart. I transfer it onto the sleek surface, like the clear block. Next, if needed, I squeeze the barrel of my water brush to pump a little bit of water out. And by doing so, I dilute the color. I mix it with water, and using that same brush, I pick it up again, but from the block this time, and I transfer it onto my paper. When you color, it is best to start with a light color, with diluted color, and build the color intensity as you move forward. I also wanted to mention why I heat embossed my image and not just stamped it onto the paper. With heat embossing, you get a nice raised edge to your images. This edge, when you watercolor, creates an obstacle that prevents the color from going outside the line. So this helps me to color. I don't have to focus as much on staying within the lines. I am relying on that heat embossed edge to stop my brush and prevent the color from traveling where it is not supposed to travel to. Of course, I do end up going outside the lines a little bit, but not too much. I'm using quinacridone rose color to color some of the flowers on my background, and I'll use yellow quinacridone gold color to color the rest. I'm doing a wet on dry coloring, meaning my paper is dry and I am applying wet color onto it. Once the first layer of color has had a little bit of time to dry, I come in and add a second layer of color, but it's not diluted color this time or diluted less, and thus it looks more vibrant on my project. You can also notice that I'm not using a lot of pigment. Yes, I am picking it up from the dot often, but I'm not grabbing a lot of it. I'm just picking up a tiny amount for my coloring. If I were to do a wash in one color, a wash or a background to cover the entire card front, I'd probably use up the whole dot of that pigment. But if I use it just for coloring individual images, like these flowers, it lasts me a good amount of time. Now, the purpose of this watercolor dot chart or other dot charts like this is to try the color out. You're not buying the entire tube of color, but you're buying a sampler sheet where you have enough watercolor, enough pigment to swatch it and try it on several projects to understand if this is the color you'd like to add to your personal collection. This is how I got started with these Daniel Smith watercolors, and I'm so glad that I had these charts because they really helped me to pick the right colors for my collection. Once my floral coloring was finished, I moved on to coloring the background. This part is usually the scariest, as you've put all that time and effort into coloring your flowers, and you don't want to mess it up. I do feel like this every time I want to color a background, but I just keep going as I like to try new things, and I like to have different colors of backgrounds, not just white. So I was debating between 3 different colors: cobalt teal blue, indigo, and lunar blue, and all of these are available in my dot chart. I ended up going with the lightest color, cobalt teal blue, and I colored the entire white space in between the flowers using this color. Because at this point I started to add a lot of water to my paper, I wish I had taped this background down, as taping your watercolor piece to a hard surface helps the paper to remain flat and it prevents it from warping. But it was a little bit too late for that. Once my background was dry, I sent it through my die cutting machine using the embossing sandwich and nothing else, so no dies and no embossing folder, just the paper and embossing sandwich for my platinum die cutting machine, and that really helped to flatten this paper back to normal. I also used my tonic aqua shimmer pen and went over the flowers, adding shimmer to the petals. It is hard to see this on video, and this color shows up best on dark surfaces, but it did add a little bit of a beautiful shimmer to this piece. You can also use this aqua shimmer pen as a water brush for your coloring. I colored another background using the same Cosmos background stamp and my Daniel Smith watercolors, but I used the aqua shimmer pen instead of my water brush to transfer the color onto my painting. And I also did a wet on wet coloring, meaning I pre-wet the paper first using a water brush, regular water brush, and then I applied the color using my shimmer pen. I didn't quite like the colors that I picked for that background, so I didn't use it. I did not make a card using that background, but I still wanted to share it with you. I used Simon Says Stamp Stained Glass Love stamp and coordinating die to create a sentiment for this card, and I simply white heat embossed to my very best friend in white embossing powder onto black cardstock. I also embellished my card using clear droplets in small and medium size, and these are from Pretty Pink Posh. So this finishes my video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in a comment section below. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't yet done so. If you are a subscriber but are not receiving new video notifications, check the bell icon on the homepage of my channel to get notified every time there's a new video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!